What if the holiest seat of power in medieval Europe wasn't guided by faith alone, but by hidden schemes and political maneuvering? For 70 years, the popes didn't rule from Rome, the heart of Christendom, but from a small French city called Avignon. This wasn't just a change of address, it was a seismic shift that reshaped the church, divided nations, and left behind a trail of unanswered questions. Was this move truly a spiritual retreat, or was it something far more calculated? Behind the grand cathedrals and pious pronouncements, whispers of secret deals, financial scandals, and even accusations of heresy swirled around the Avignon Papacy. And today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most enigmatic chapters. Picture this: the year is 1309, and the streets of Rome are chaos. The Pope's palace is more fortress than holy sanctuary, surrounded by warring factions and political enemies. Then, a shocking decision. The Pope packs up and moves the entire seat of papal power to Avignon, a city under the shadow of the French crown. For 7 decades, this became the new Vatican, a place where piety and power collided in ways that still baffle historians. Why would the Church abandon its ancient home? Was it truly for safety, or was there a darker, more strategic game at play? Some say the French king pulled the strings, turning the papacy into a puppet of his own ambitions. Others point to the staggering wealth accumulated during this era, gold flowing into Avignon while Rome crumbled. And then there are the rumors of forbidden knowledge, suppressed texts, and even whispers of blackmail lurking in the papal archives. This isn't just a tale of medieval politics, it's a story about how power works when no one's watching. The Avignon Papacy wasn't just a historical blip, it was a masterclass in manipulation where faith became a tool and loyalty had a price. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel the mysteries that historians still debate, the hidden alliances, the unexplained deaths, and the startling evidence that suggests this wasn't just a holy retreat, it was a carefully orchestrated takeover. By the time we're done, you'll see this controversial era in a whole new light. So, let's step into the shadows of Avignon and uncover the truths that time almost forgot. The decision to move the papacy to Avignon didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of decades of tension, betrayal, and outright survival. To understand why Pope Clement V uprooted the Church from Rome, we have to rewind to the bloody struggle between the papacy and the French monarchy. King Philip IV of France, nicknamed Philip the Fair, was no friend of the Church. He saw the Pope's power as a rival to his own, and he wasn't afraid to play dirty. Just years before the move to Avignon, Philip had orchestrated the brutal suppression of the Knights Templar, a wealthy and powerful order that answered directly to the Pope. Their sudden downfall wasn't just about piety, it was about control. And when the smoke cleared, Philip had his hands on their vast riches and a clear message for the Vatican: cross me and you'll pay. Officially, Clement framed the move to Avignon as a temporary measure, a safe haven from the violent chaos of Rome, where rival noble families turned the streets into battlegrounds. But whispers followed him. Why choose a city so deep in French territory where Philip's influence was absolute? The papal palace in Avignon wasn't just grand, it was a fortress surrounded by walls that seemed less about protection and more about keeping prying eyes out. And then there were the appointments. Suddenly, French cardinals dominated the Church's inner circle, their loyalties seemingly split between Rome and Paris. Coincidence? Unlikely. The financial records tell an even darker story. While Rome's cathedrals fell into disrepair, Avignon gleamed with gold, much of it flowing from new taxes and fees imposed by Clement's administration. Critics accused him of turning the Church into a money-making machine, with salvation itself up for sale to the highest bidder. But perhaps the most damning evidence of all lies in the timing. Within years of settling in Avignon, Clement issued a series of decrees that quietly handed over church authority to Philip, including the right to tax clergy and even veto papal decisions. It was as if the spiritual leader of Christendom had become a branch of the French crown. Yet for all the power plays and backroom deals, the Avignon Papacy wasn't just a French takeover, it was a survival strategy. Clement knew Rome was crumbling, and without a stable base, the church risked collapse. What looks like surrender to modern eyes might have been, in that brutal medieval world, the only move left. But that doesn't explain the bodies left in its wake, the mysteriously dead cardinals, the silenced dissenters, the documents that vanished from the archives. The truth is, we may never know just how much of Avignon was built on faith and how much on fear. The Avignon Papal Palace wasn't just a residence, it was a statement carved in stone. Towering over the city, its sheer size dwarfed everything around it, a deliberate display of dominance meant to silence any doubt about where real power now lay. But look closer, and the architecture tells a different story. Those soaring walls, studded with arrow slits disguised as decorative motifs, weren't merely for show. The palace was designed like a labyrinth, with corridors that twisted unexpectedly, private chambers hidden behind tapestries, and even a network of secret passages rumored to connect directly to the French king's envoys. This wasn't just a holy retreat, it was a fortress with two faces, one radiant with stained glass and gold leaf, the other whispering of locked doors and watched footsteps. Take the consistory hall, where cardinals gathered under vaulted ceilings painted with celestial scenes. At first glance, it spoke of divine authority. But the seating arrangement betrayed the truth. French prelates clustered near the papal throne, while Italian and German cardinals found themselves relegated to the periphery, their voices literally pushed to the edges. Even the famed gardens, bursting with rare herbs and fountains, held a darker purpose. Walled on all sides and overlooked by guard towers, they were less a place of meditation than a gilded cage, a reminder that every step the Pope took was observed. Then there's the Treasury Tower, its basement lined with iron-bound chests that held the church's wealth taxes from across Europe, gifts from nobles seeking favors, even the confiscated treasures of the Templars. The tower's entrance was guarded day and night, not by Swiss guards in ceremonial garb, but by French soldiers in full armor and buried in the palace archives. Contracts written in meticulous Latin that granted the French crown unprecedented control over church appointments and finances. Coincidence or proof that the palace's true architect wasn't a cleric but a king? Yet the most telling detail might be the palace's sheer isolation. Unlike Rome's Vatican, woven into the city's bustling heart, Avignon's palace stood apart, accessible only by a single drawbridge. Pilgrims who came seeking blessings had to pass through multiple checkpoints, their offerings counted and recorded before they ever glimpsed the Pope. It was as if the church, once a living, breathing part of Christendom, had been quarantined, cut off from the world it was meant to serve. Whether this was protection or imprisonment depends on who you ask. But one thing's certain, behind those opulent walls, faith and politics waged a silent war, and the echoes of that struggle still haunt Avignon stones today. Behind every powerful pope there stood an even more powerful king, and in Clement V's case, that king was Philip IV of France, a ruler who didn't just influence the church, but arguably held it by the throat. To understand the Avignon Papacy, you have to understand Philip. This wasn't a monarch who politely negotiated with the Vatican, he strong-armed it into submission. The turning point, the brutal suppression of the Knights Templar in 1307. Philip owed them staggering debts, and their vast network of wealth and influence made them a threat to his authority. So he did what any medieval king with unchecked ambition would do. He annihilated them. Under torture, Templars confessed to heresy, blasphemy, even spitting on the cross. Their Grand Master was burned at the stake, and Philip seized their treasures. But here's the chilling part. Pope Clement, just 2 years into his papacy, didn't just allow this, he endorsed it. Why would a pope sanction the destruction of Christendom's most loyal warrior monks? The answer might lie in Clement's past. Before becoming pope, he was Bertrand de Got, a French bishop with rumors swirling around him, whispers of undisclosed scandals, secret agreements, even allegations of simony. Some historians believe Philip had dirt on him, leverage to ensure compliance. It's no coincidence that just months after Clement's election, Philip's men were already rounding up Templars. The king didn't just want their money, he wanted the Pope to publicly legitimize his power grab, and Clement, whether out of fear or complicity, signed the order. But the Templars were just the beginning. Philip's grip tightened with every passing year. He demanded and received unprecedented control over church appointments, ensuring French cardinals dominated the college. He siphoned church taxes into his own coffers to fund his wars. At one point, he even forced Clement to declare that the king answered only to God, not the Pope. This wasn't just influence, it was a slow-motion coup. The Avignon Papacy didn't just serve the French crown, it became an extension of it, yet calling Clement a mere puppet oversimplifies the truth. Survival in the 14th century required alliances, and Philip offered stability amidst Rome's chaos. Clement may have traded independence for protection, but he also used Avignon to centralize papal authority in ways that outlasted Philip's threats. The question isn't just whether the Pope was controlled, it's whether he believed the price was worth paying. And the answer might lie in the shadows of Avignon's palace, where faith and power clashed in silence. The wealth flowing through Avignon didn't just come from tithes and offerings. It moved along a shadowy network of loans, debts, and backroom deals with some of Europe's most powerful bankers. At the height of the Avignon Papacy, Italian banking dynasties like the Bardi and Peruzzi weren't just financiers, they were kingmakers, their gold propping up thrones and tilting papal decisions in ways that blurred the line between faith and finance. Look at the records and a pattern emerges. Every time the Pope needed funds for lavish building projects or military campaigns, these bankers stepped in with strings attached. Take the Bardi family. Based in Florence, their ledger books read like a who's who of 14th century power players. They funded wars for the English crown, backed French trade expeditions, and most tellingly held the Pope's personal debts. When Clement V needed to bankroll his sudden move to Avignon, it was the Bardi who provided the staggering sums required to transform a sleepy provincial town into a papal capital. But what did they get in return? Papal bulls favoring their trade routes, exemptions from church taxes, even the right to collect tithes on the Pope's behalf. At one point, the Bardi practically operated as the Vatican's unofficial treasury, their agents shuffling funds across Europe with papal seals granting them immunity from scrutiny. Then there were the Peruzzi, rivals to the Bardi but just as deeply entangled in Avignon's machinery. Their loans didn't just fund cathedrals, they financed wars. When the papacy needed to raise an army against rebellious Italian cities, the Peruzzi provided the cash, often securing repayment through future church revenues. Critics began calling it spiritual usury, a system where salvation seemed pawned for profit. The darkest whispers suggested certain papal decrees, condemning rival city-states or absolving favored nobles bore an uncanny resemblance to the bankers' investment portfolios. Coincidence, maybe, but when the Peruzzi collapsed in the 1340s, their bankruptcy records revealed something startling. Pages of unpaid papal debts, some signed by cardinals who just happened to be relatives of banking executives. Yet the most damning evidence lies in the silence. Official Vatican documents from Avignon meticulously record every candle purchased or mosaic commissioned, but the ledgers showing loans from the Bardi and Peruzzi. Suspiciously spotty, whole years of financial transactions vanish, leaving historians to piece together the truth from merchant guild archives and the angry chronicles of rival cities. What emerges is a papacy that didn't just borrow money, it became dependent on it to the point where critics asked, who really held the keys to the kingdom? The man in the white robes or the bankers whose gold kept his walls standing? This wasn't just corruption, it was a financial revolution. For the first time, the Church's spiritual authority became collateral in a web of debt that stretched from Avignon to London. And when those debts came due, the fallout would shake Europe to its core. The Bardi and Peruzzi collapses didn't just bankrupt merchants, they triggered a crisis of faith, leaving ordinary believers to wonder if their tithes were filling God's coffers or a banker's purse. The Avignon Papacy didn't just sell indulgences, it might have pawned its soul. The vaults beneath Avignon's papal palace should have held the wealth of Christendom, gold from a dozen kingdoms, jewels donated by penitent nobles, even relics like the crown of thorns or fragments of the true cross. But by the time the popes returned to Rome in 1377, those vaults were shockingly empty. Where did it all go? The official ledgers blame wars and building projects, but the numbers don't add up. Enter the shadow trail of missing treasures, a mystery that still divides historians. Was this theft, extortion, or something far stranger? Start with the relics. Dozens of sacred objects vanished from church inventories during the Avignon years: chalices, martyrs' bones, even a vial supposedly containing the Virgin Mary's milk. Some resurfaced decades later in French cathedrals, gifted by kings who just happened to be the Pope's closest allies. One particularly brazen case involves St. Louis's personal reliquary, which mysteriously migrated from the Vatican to Paris under King Philip VI. Court records show the Pope donated it as a gesture of goodwill, but contemporary chroniclers tell a different story. Philip's soldiers allegedly occupied Avignon for 3 weeks that year, leaving only after certain sacred collateral changed hands. Then there's the gold. Papal tax collectors scoured Europe, demanding payments to fund Avignon's grandeur. Yet surviving account books from cities like Florence and Cologne show vast sums never arrived. Where did the money go? Follow the paper trail, and you'll find French military campaigns suspiciously well-funded during lean years. In 1346, during a siege of an English-held fortress, French knights suddenly appeared with state-of-the-art armor and siege engines paid for, according to a recovered quartermaster's note, by the Holy Father's reserve. The most damning evidence comes from an unlikely source: kitchen ledgers. While Avignon's palace chefs recorded every sack of flour and barrel of wine, the treasury records for those same months show bizarre gaps. One week in 1352, the Pope hosted a lavish banquet for French nobles. The kitchen accounts list golden plates and jeweled goblets, items later marked in the treasury log as lost in transit when auditors came calling. Yet pinning this on simple greed misses the bigger picture. Some popes may have been complicit, but others were clearly cornered. When Innocent VI tried to reclaim stolen treasures in 1355, French cardinals abruptly accused his favorite bishop of heresy. The charges vanished along with the bishop after Innocent dropped the matter. This wasn't just embezzlement, it was a system of control where relics and gold became bargaining chips in a game of survival. The real question isn't whether treasures disappeared, but who truly held the keys to those locked vaults: the men in white robes or the kings waiting in the shadows. The Western Schism didn't just split the church, it turned Christendom into a battleground where faith collided with naked ambition. In 1378, Pope Gregory XI finally returned the papacy to Rome after 7 decades in Avignon, hoping to heal old wounds. But within months he was dead, and the cardinals, pressured by Roman mobs, elected an Italian pope, Urban VI. What happened next was unprecedented. The same cardinals declared the election invalid, fled Rome, and crowned a rival pope, Clement VII, who promptly marched back to Avignon. Suddenly, Europe had 2 men in white robes, each claiming to be God's true representative, and each excommunicating the other's followers. Was this just chaos or something more calculated? Look closer, and Avignon's fingerprints are everywhere. The French crown, accustomed to wielding papal authority like a weapon, couldn't accept a pope they didn't control. Clement's coronation in Avignon wasn't just defiance, it was a full-scale counterattack. His court teemed with French cardinals, many holding lavish estates granted by the monarchy. Meanwhile, Urban in Rome purged anyone with ties to Avignon, creating a church split along geopolitical lines. France, Scotland, and Aragon backed Clement. England, the Holy Roman Empire, and most of Italy stood with Urban. Faith had become a proxy for war. The schism's true architects might not have been the popes at all, but the power brokers lurking in their shadows. Take Cardinal Robert of Geneva, a French nobleman who helped orchestrate Clement's election. Before donning red robes, he'd served as a military commander, crushing rebellions with brutal efficiency. His idea of diplomacy: when Urban refused to negotiate, Robert allegedly hired assassins to poison him. The plot failed, but the message was clear. This wasn't about theology, it was about control. For ordinary believers, the schism was a nightmare. Imagine being told your baptism, your marriage, even your last rites might be invalid depending on which pope your king favored. In some towns, priests secretly offered both versions of sacraments, hedging their bets against divine wrath. The chaos reached its peak in 1409, when a third pope emerged from a desperate church council, fracturing Christendom even further. For nearly 40 years, this three-way standoff turned religion into a weapon, with each side auctioning off indulgences and bishoprics to fund their rival courts. Yet the schism's most lasting damage wasn't financial, it was spiritual. When faith becomes a tool of kings, what's left for the faithful? By the time the Council of Constance finally ended the schism in 1417, the Church's authority lay in tatters. Avignon's legacy wasn't just a divided papacy, it was the unsettling revelation that even God's representatives on earth could be pawns in a game of thrones. And the players, they were always the ones holding the knives. Beneath the gilded surface of the Avignon Papacy, a secret paper trail reveals just how entangled spiritual authority had become with raw political power. Recent discoveries in the Vatican's secret archives, letters long dismissed as routine correspondence, contain shocking subtleties when read between the lines. Take a missive from Pope John XXII to King Edward III of England in 1327. On the surface, it praises Edward's piety and offers blessings for his reign. But decrypted by linguists using medieval cipher keys, the Latin text hides a far more startling message. Phrases like, "The vine of our mutual interests must be pruned with discretion," and "The harvest depends on timely silence," align eerily with later events. Specifically, Edward's sudden withdrawal of support for a rival French cardinal just weeks after receiving this letter. Coincidence? Unlikely. Then there's the infamous Wolf Code used in letters between Avignon and the Holy Roman Emperor Louis IV. References to shepherds, flocks, and wolves at the gate weren't pastoral metaphors but a covert negotiation over church lands. When Louis invaded Italy in 1327, Avignon's response was strangely muted until you decode a letter advising the emperor to let the wolf guard the southern pass. Historical records confirm his troops conveniently bypassed papal territories, focusing instead on cities hostile to Avignon's influence. This wasn't diplomacy, it was collusion written in riddles. The most damning evidence, though, lies in the parchment margins. Infrared scans of letters to Philip VI of France reveal tiny, hastily scrawled notations, amounts of silver, names of bishops, even dates that match sudden arrests of anti-French clergy. One nearly invisible annotation beside a prayer for the king's health reads 6,000 for the infirmary, likely referencing a payment disguised as charity. Worse, a 1341 letter to Naples' queen contains a smear later identified as grape juice, a known medium for invisible ink. When treated, it exposes a threat. The Angel of Marseille sings of your son's fragility, a chilling allusion to her heir's rumored illegitimacy, a scandal the Pope later mercifully declined to investigate. But were these popes willing conspirators or trapped intermediaries? Some letters showed desperation pleas for French troops to restrain the overzealous, likely Avignon's own critics, or requests to delay the messenger when auditors demanded financial transparency. The parchment itself tells a story. Many letters were written on French-made paper, not the traditional Italian vellum used in Rome, hinting at who controlled the supply chain. Even the wax seals betray tension. Several bear faint fingernail marks, as if someone had hesitated before stamping their approval, the bitter truth. These letters suggest the Avignon Papacy wasn't just influenced by politics, it was a full participant in the game. Spiritual authority became a bargaining chip, salvation a negotiable currency. When a pope wrote, "May God guide your hand," certain monarchs understood the unspoken addition. So long as your hand serves our interests, the ink may have faded, but the stain on history remains. Pope John XXII wasn't just a man of God. He was a theological lightning rod whose teachings threatened to split the church from within. Imagine the uproar when, in 1331, he declared that even the purest souls wouldn't behold the face of God until after the final judgment. This wasn't some obscure sermon, it was a direct challenge to centuries of belief, stripping saints and martyrs of their promised heavenly vision. The backlash was instant and furious. Theologians accused him of heresy. Franciscan friars, already at odds with Avignon over their vow of poverty, denounced him as a false prophet. Even kings wrote letters demanding clarification, because if John was right, everything the church had taught about the afterlife was wrong. But was this really about theology, or was it a smokescreen? John's controversial doctrine emerged at a suspicious moment, just as whispers about Avignon's finances grew too loud to ignore. The same year he made his explosive pronouncement, records show French bishops suddenly stopped questioning missing funds, while Italian cardinals who demanded audits found themselves reassigned to remote dioceses. Coincidence, maybe, but John had a habit of timing his spiritual bombshells to drown out earthly scandals. When German monks exposed rampant simony in his court, he responded by launching an inquisition into their suspect mysticism. When the Holy Roman Emperor demanded church reforms, John excommunicated him, not for political meddling, but for endangering souls with his reckless piety. The deeper you dig, the more John's reign resembles a high-stakes magic trick, diverting attention with one hand while the other lifted gold from the collection plate. His treasury swelled with donations from nobles eager to secure papal favors, while his theologians penned dense treatises justifying his unorthodox views. Even his lavish building projects seemed designed to dazzle. The palace of the popes expanded under his watch, its new chapels inlaid with gold that, according to ledgers from Marseille, had been seized from a ship carrying Templar remnants. Yet calling John a mere charlatan misses the sinister genius of his rule. His radical theology didn't just distract, it divided. By insisting souls languished in a waiting place until Judgment Day, he gave Avignon unprecedented leverage. Suddenly, only the Pope could promise true salvation, and only through obedience to his decrees. Critics called it spiritual extortion, but for those in power, it was pure strategy. When your authority rests on controlling the gates of heaven, who dares question where the keys came from? The ultimate irony. John died reciting orthodox prayers, his final words a renunciation of his own heresy. Whether this was deathbed repentance or another calculated move, we'll never know. But in Avignon's shadowy halls, one truth remained: faith, when weaponized, could be more profitable than any relic and more dangerous than any army. When the Black Death swept through Europe in 1347, death came so swiftly that entire villages vanished between sunrise and sunset. As carts piled high with bodies became a common sight, people turned desperately to the church, only to find Avignon's response shrouded in controversy. Pope Clement VI, who ruled from his gilded palace, made a show of piety by ordering processions and public prayers. But behind those towering walls, another story unfolded. While commoners died by the thousands, Clement reportedly sealed himself in a private chamber between two roaring fires, believing the heat would purify the air. His physicians smothered him in rosewater-soaked cloths, a futile barrier against a disease they didn't understand. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. As flames licked at the Pope's isolation outside, the faithful burned in a very different fire. Then came the relics. With panic spreading faster than the plague, Avignon's markets overflowed with miraculous cures, fragments of the true cross, vials of saints' blood, even feathers from angels' wings, all stamped with suspiciously fresh papal seals. Historians digging through 14th century merchant ledgers found payments from church officials to forgers in Marseille and Lyon, commissioning fake artifacts to meet the desperate demand. One particularly egregious case involved a supposed thorn from Christ's crown, sold to 12 different towns in the same month. When questioned, Avignon's treasurer claimed the thorn had multiplied through divine intervention, an explanation that fooled few but enriched many. Yet the darkest chapter may be the papal court's retreat. As the plague reached Avignon's gates, cardinals abandoned the city for fortified country estates, taking their physicians and apothecaries with them. They left behind locked storehouses of grain and wine, supplies that could have fed the starving, while issuing decrees that anyone hiding plague symptoms would be excommunicated. This wasn't just cowardice, it was calculated self-preservation. The same cardinals who fled wrote letters blaming the pestilence on the sins of the common people, conveniently absolving themselves of responsibility. But was this pure exploitation or something more complex? Clement did authorize the consecration of the Rhone River as a mass burial site when cemeteries overflowed, a move that probably saved lives by preventing further contamination. He also quietly funded a handful of doctors trying experimental treatments, though records suggest these were mostly physicians catering to noble families. The tragic truth is that the Church, like everyone else, was flying blind. With no real understanding of germ theory, their responses, whether well-intentioned or cynical, reflected the terror of the age. The ultimate irony, the plague exposed Avignon's fragile legitimacy. When people needed spiritual leadership most, they found their shepherds either peddling false hope or barricaded in luxury. In the end, the Black Death didn't just kill millions, it planted seeds of doubt that would eventually help topple the very institution claiming to hold the keys to salvation. The question wasn't whether God had sent the plague as punishment, but who the punishment was truly meant for. The whispers in royal courts weren't always prayers. Sometimes they were coded messages carried by men who wore no uniforms but moved with deadly purpose. Hidden in plain sight among scribes, chaplains, and even jesters, Avignon's spy network stretched its fingers into every corner of Europe, turning foreign palaces into chessboards where bishops and kings became pawns. Take the curious case of Cardinal Talleyrand, who hosted lavish banquets for French and English nobles during the 100 Years' War. His guests assumed they were discussing diplomacy over wine, but servants later reported how the cardinal's secretaries would linger near doorways, transcribing every slurred confession or battlefield secret. By morning, those words would be en route to Avignon, tucked inside hollowed-out Bibles or sewn into the linings of merchants' cloaks. Then there were the penitents, a network of informants disguised as humble monks seeking alms. Their robes concealed more than poverty. They carried lists of who attended which mass, which nobles confessed to doubting the Pope's authority, even which bishops had secret mistresses. One surviving ledger from 1356 details payments to a brother Heinrich for spiritual reconnaissance in the Holy Roman Empire, his reports littered with precise troop movements and the private grievances of disgruntled barons. This wasn't just gossip, it was blackmail material waiting to happen. When an Austrian duke suddenly reversed his opposition to Avignon's taxes, contemporaries noted his illegitimate son, a fact known only to his confessor, mysteriously received a church sinecure weeks earlier. The most brazen operations targeted papal elections, In 1310, documents surfaced showing French agents posing as Italian merchants, spreading fabricated rumors that rival cardinals had contracted the plague. Panicked conclaves rushed their votes, ensuring a pro-French pope. Decades later, a trunk recovered from a sunken Venetian galley contained letters between Avignon's spymaster and a choir master in Rome, instructing him to teach specific hymns containing acrostic codes about which cardinals could be bribed. Yet for all its reach, the spy network had blind spots. The English crown, suspecting infiltration, began planting false intelligence like the leaked plan to invade Normandy in 1342. When French forces massed there, England struck Calais instead. Avignon's furious missives to their agents demanded explanations, exposing just how deeply they'd been played. What chills the blood isn't the spying itself, but how it twisted faith into a weapon. When a confessor could be an informant, when sacred vows masked surveillance, what remained of trust? The Avignon Papacy didn't just watch, it weaponized devotion, turning the very channels of grace into pipelines of control. And in doing so, it proved no throne was too high, no confessional too private for the long arm of papal politics. The deaths of Avignon's popes and cardinals read less like natural passings and more like pages torn from a thriller, each one laced with enough inconsistencies to fuel centuries of suspicion. Take Clement V, the architect of the papacy's move to France. Officially, he died of illness in 1314 after years of suffering from what chroniclers called a wasting disease. But dig deeper and the details unravel. His final weeks were marked by violent stomach pains, a symptom his physicians couldn't explain. Rumors swirled that Philip the Fair, the same French king who'd leaned on Clement to dismantle the Templars, hosted a banquet for the Pope just days before his collapse. The timing was too convenient, especially when Philip's own court records show a payment to a foreign apothecary for cleansing herbs that same week. Then there's John XXII's bizarre demise in 1334. The Pope, who'd courted heresy with his unorthodox views on the afterlife, reportedly died mid-sentence during a meeting with cardinals. Witnesses claimed his face twisted in agony before he slumped forward, a half-written excommunication decree still in his hand, the official cause a sudden seizure. But Venetian diplomats later intercepted letters from Avignon mentioning a taster found dead in the papal kitchens hours earlier, his body dumped in the Rhone before an autopsy could be performed. The most brazen case might be Benedict XII's sudden decline in 1342. A robust man known for his love of hunting, he fell ill after appointing a group of reformist cardinals to investigate church corruption. His symptoms, blistering skin, confusion, loss of motor control, mirror medieval descriptions of mercury poisoning. Stranger still, the attending physician fled Avignon days later, only to resurface as the personal doctor of a French duke with ties to Benedict's political rivals. But the shadow play didn't stop at popes. Cardinal Guillaume de la Jugue, a fierce critic of Avignon's financial scandals, dropped dead during a consistory meeting in 1350. His peers attributed it to apoplexy, but a servant's later testimony revealed the cardinal had been vomiting blood for hours, a detail omitted from official records. And when Cardinal Guy de Boulogne, a key negotiator during the Schism, died en route to Rome in 1373, his entourage reported his wine tasted metallic the night before. His body was buried hastily in an unmarked grave, his notes on reunifying the church never found. What connects these deaths isn't just the whiff of foul play, it's the patterns. Victims often died while challenging French influence or probing financial irregularities. Their successors tended to be more compliant, their investigations quietly shelved. The Avignon Papacy didn't just endure political pressure, it thrived in an atmosphere where dissent could be fatal, and obedience was the surest path to survival. Whether by poison, staged illness, or the silent pressure of knowing too much, the message was clear. In this game of holy power, some secrets were meant to stay buried. Pope Gregory XI's return to Rome in 1377 wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a moment that could have shattered the papacy forever. After nearly 70 years in Avignon, the decision to abandon the lavish palace and its French backers seemed unthinkable, but Gregory didn't act alone. The fiery letters of Saint Catherine of Siena, a mystic with no formal power but unrivaled moral authority, had been piling up on his desk for years. She didn't mince words, calling Avignon a den of thieves and warning that God's wrath would rain down if the church didn't return to its spiritual home. Her vision struck a nerve, but was Gregory truly swayed by divine inspiration, or was he cornered? Behind the scenes, the political calculus was unraveling. French cardinals, long the power behind Avignon's throne, had grown restless. Whispers circulated that Gregory's attempts to reform church finances, cutting off their lucrative sinecures, had turned even his allies against him. Then there were the riots. When Roman ambassadors stormed Avignon demanding the papacy's return, they didn't come with polite petitions. They brought threats of rebellion, warning that Italy would abandon the church entirely if the Pope stayed in France. Gregory found himself trapped between a celestial ultimatum from Catherine and a very earthly revolt brewing back in Rome. The journey itself was anything but triumphant. As Gregory's entourage wound through the Alps, French troops shadowed them at a distance, their presence less an honor guard and more a silent reminder of what or who he was leaving behind. When he finally reached Rome, the city was a shell of its former glory. The Lateran Palace lay in ruins, its halls stripped bare by looters and neglect. Instead of the orderly bureaucracy of Avignon, Gregory faced a nest of feuding nobles and rebellious clergy. Had he made a terrible mistake, the answer might lie in the timing. Just months before his return, secret negotiations with the French crown had collapsed. Historians poring over archived correspondence found a damning draft, a proposed treaty that would have kept the papacy in Avignon in exchange for French military support against Rome's rebels. When King Charles V refused, Gregory had no leverage left. Saint Catherine's warnings may have framed his decision as holy obedience, but the paper trail suggests something darker, a retreat, not a revelation. His death less than a year later only deepened the mystery. Surrounded by hostile cardinals and a city sliding into chaos, Gregory's final words reportedly lamented the poison of Avignon, yet his will included staggering bequests to French allies. The schism that erupted after his passing wasn't just a power struggle, it was the explosion of tensions he'd tried and failed to contain. In the end, Gregory's return to Rome wasn't a clean break with Avignon's corruption. It was the unmasking of a papacy that had become too entangled to ever truly escape. The Council of Constance in 1417 wasn't just an attempt to heal the church, it was a desperate surgery to remove the rot left by Avignon. For the first time, cardinals, bishops, and even emperors gathered not just to end the schism, but to confront the toxic legacy of a papacy that had traded spiritual authority for political survival. The reforms they passed read like a confession. No more papal monopolies on appointments, stricter financial oversight, even a decree that general councils could overrule popes in emergencies. These weren't tweaks, they were shackles designed to prevent another Avignon. Yet beneath the surface, old habits died hard. The same French cardinals who'd benefited from decades of backroom deals still packed the voting chambers, ensuring the new Pope, Martin V, came with their stamp of approval. But the damage ran deeper than politics. Avignon had taught ordinary believers a dangerous lesson. That salvation could be negotiated, that relics had price tags, that even the holiest men weren't above suspicion. The peasant revolts that erupted across Europe in the 15th century weren't just about taxes, they crackled with anti-clerical fury. In England, Lollard preachers railed against church corruption, their pamphlets dripping with references to the Babylonian captivity of Avignon. In Bohemia, Jan Hus invoked the same reforms promised at Constance as he burned at the stake, his followers waging wars that would last decades. the financial scars were just as deep. Avignon's shadow banking system had turned the church into a debtor, reliant on loans from Florentine financiers who expected favors in return. Even after the return to Rome, account books show popes still paying off century-old debts, some from deals struck to fund Avignon's palace renovations. The church's solution doubled down on indulgences, a move that would later spark Luther's Reformation. In a bitter twist, the very financial tricks perfected in Avignon became the kindling for Protestant fury. Yet the most insidious legacy might be the erosion of trust. Before Avignon, the Pope's word was gospel. After, monarchs like Henry VIII would cite the papacy's French captivity as proof that Rome couldn't be trusted with spiritual or political authority. The Reformation didn't start in Wittenberg. It was seeded in the opulent halls of Avignon, where faith became just another currency in a game of power. And what of the palace itself? Stripped of its treasures, it became a crumbling monument to ambition. French revolutionaries later used its stones to build prisons, as if history itself was passing judgment. Today, tourists wander its hollow halls, unaware that the echoes they hear aren't just footsteps, they're the ghostly whispers of a church that nearly sold its soul. Centuries later, the Avignon Papacy still feels less like a chapter of history and more like a cautionary tale. A 70-year masterclass in how power distorts even the holiest institutions. What began as a temporary refuge from Rome's chaos became a labyrinth of financial schemes, political puppetry, and spiritual compromises so deep that the church nearly lost its soul. The gold-plated palace, the whispered deals with kings, the relics traded like currency, they all point to an uncomfortable truth. Faith, when entangled with unchecked ambition, can become just another weapon in the arsenal of control. And perhaps the most chilling revelation isn't that these things happened, but how easily they were justified. Every tax levied, every rival silenced, every doctrine twisted was done in the name of preserving the church. Yet for all its shadows, Avignon's legacy isn't just one of corruption. It's a mirror. The same forces that drove popes into French pockets, greed, fear, the hunger for stability, still shape our world today. Modern institutions, from governments to corporations, face their own versions of Avignon's dilemma. How much to compromise principles for survival, and where to draw the line before the compromise becomes the identity. The real mystery isn't whether the Avignon Papacy was holy or hypocritical, it's how thin the line between those two really was. History's greatest secrets aren't always locked away in vaults. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight, masked by the pomp of palaces or the piety of robes. So what do you think? Was Avignon a calculated takeover by the French crown, or a desperate bid to save the church from collapse? A holy retreat corrupted by politics, or a political scheme disguised as faith? Drop your theories in the comments, because the whispers of the past still have a lot to teach us.